Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and dive into everything, guys. I will be a little nasally. I apologize, but we'll dive into it all. So I'll be talking about boundary setting today. And it's just because I think setting boundaries is an important part of establishing one's identity. And it's a crucial part of your mental health and well-being. Boundaries can be physical or emotional. They can range from loose to rigid. And with healthy boundaries, they typically are going to fall somewhere in between. So learning how to show compassion and kindness to yourself is going to be crucial in setting healthy boundaries. So I wanted to talk about this going into the holidays. Oh, there's Grace. I wanted to talk about this going into the holidays because this is where we really tend to, I guess, get a little bit more loose with our boundaries. And we tend to not really respect a lot of the things that we want to set for ourselves. So I just thought it was an important time. Because this is usually where people feel a lot more stress. And usually the reason stress starts to come in is because we're actually starting to get loose with our boundaries and we're not really taking care of ourselves anymore. So let's just dive straight into it. Is what are boundaries? Okay, so a boundary is a limit or a space between you and the other person. It's a clear place where you begin and the other person ends. The purpose of setting a healthy boundary is, of course, to protect and take good care of you. So healthy boundaries are those that are set to make sure we're mentally and emotionally stable. Specifically, healthy boundaries can help us define our individuality and can help us indicate what we will and will not hold ourselves responsible for. Okay. If you ever notice yourself feeling angry, resentful, or guilty, there's a sure sign that you need to reset a healthy boundary or communicate it more clearly. Okay. Setting boundaries for yourself and honoring the boundaries of others isn't a textbook science, but you can learn ways to take charge of your life, whether you want it to be clearer rules with your family or assert your space when it comes with strangers. So let's dive into a couple of tips and benefits. So first, with the benefits of setting boundaries. Okay. I know the word boundary can be kind of misleading, especially once we get into different roles, like as it could be as a mom or it could be as a teacher, as a leader, is that we don't want to be setting like walls around people. And that's what the word boundary kind of sounds like. It conveys the idea of keeping yourself separate, but boundaries are actually connecting points since they provide healthy rules for navigating relationships, intimate or professional. Okay. So number one thing is that boundaries actually help improve our relationships, right? Because they protect our relationships from becoming unsafe. In that way, they actually bring us closer together than farther apart. And they're therefore necessary in any relationship. I know, especially even as a manager and as we start to move up more into different roles, we want to help as many people as possible. And we want to leave ourselves available for as many people as possible. Okay, but that actually isn't always healthy for us. So having boundaries allows you to make yourself a priority, whether that's in self-care, career aspirations, or within relationships. Number two is it helps you conserve emotional agency. Okay, is that you don't actually have to have the same boundaries or comfort level for everyone. Okay, boundaries that let us have different radiuses depending on the situation or person can also help you maintain enough energy to care for yourself. Okay, so like Brie obviously is going to have different agency when it comes to like her family than maybe if she was helping with representatives. Okay. And so understanding that just because you may be happy to lend a hand out to like maybe your best friend on moving day doesn't mean you always have to do the heavy emotional lifting when someone texts you about their latest drama. Okay. And I think this is important to know because especially a job like this is we typically do take on like carer roles where we want to take care of other people. So somebody will text you really late at night and you're like, oh yeah, I'm there for you. I'll stay up. I'll listen to everything you need. Okay. But maybe that actually wasn't the best thing for you. Okay. And so learning to be able to set that kind of guideline where, yeah, we want to help other people, but you are your most important asset. So making sure that you guys are taking care of yourself as well. Okay. And then lastly, boundaries can be flexible. Okay. They don't have to be drawn in permanent ink. It's good to think about them and occasionally reassess them. Okay. Because when boundaries are too rigid or inflexible, that's when problems can occur. Excuse me. Okay, you don't want to isolate yourself or avoid closeness altogether, okay, or even give up time, give up all your time to others. Okay, creating boundaries that are too bendy is often a common problem for women, is that we usually tend to be, like I said, more in that carer roles where we're like, okay, yeah, whatever, I'll help everybody with everything. Okay, and learning how to take a step back from that as well. Okay, a couple other benefits and advantages of setting good boundaries. Excuse me. Okay, other benefits of setting good boundaries is pretty much that. No, I realized I hadn't even skipped to my slides. I was just talking. Sorry, guys. All right. So here you go. So other advantages of healthy boundaries is it allows you guys to have some good mental health, some good emotional health, develop that autonomy, develop your own identity, and a huge one, especially in the business sense, is being able to avoid burnout and influence others' behavior. Okay. Excuse me, should be done with coughing. Okay. Okay. Healthy boundaries, though, are a crucial component of self-care. And that's because in work or in our personal relationships, poor boundaries lead to resentment, anger, and burnout. Okay. Even teachers will say that it helps them avoid burnout and staying in their profession longer when they are able to set those boundaries. Okay. And this is important because it indicates that healthy boundaries at work help someone find more fulfillment and less stress in their professional life. Okay. Leaving room for a better personal life. More generally, the consequence of not setting healthy boundaries often include stress, financial burdens, wasted time, relationships issues, and then they can cause, obviously, mental distress. Okay. In other words, a lack of healthy boundaries can negatively affect all aspects of someone's life. Okay. So let's go into how to set boundaries. Let's go into how to set boundaries. So diving in there. So how to set your personal and even professional boundaries. I have just 4 little tips there. Okay. So the first one is to define. Okay. And this is going to be different for each of you, but identify what your desired boundary is. Okay. Identify what your desired boundary is. Okay. I would say the first step in this is to conduct an audit on yourself. Okay. Beyond simply, communicating, really just kind of go within, do a journaling exercise with yourself. And this can actually go a long way in providing clarity around where you need to set limits. Okay. Start by becoming more aware of those people and situations that cause stress and anxiety. Okay. Write them down. If you notice yourself, as I said, feeling angry, resentful, or guilty, that's a sure sign that you may need to reset a boundary or communicate it more clearly. Okay. Think of limits that you would want to set, okay? Because once you have an idea of the areas you need to focus, start setting those limits, okay? One example could be just not checking work emails in the evening, okay? Or be like not receiving text by a certain time so you can have family time. I know for me, like by Saturday, I have pretty much a cutoff where it's like from 2 to 10. That's family time where I'm just like, this is what I do. I don't do PCs. I'll text reps here or there, but I don't do anything huge or major that's going to take away from family time. Like, I'm just going to spend time with my wife because it's the only day that we have together. Okay. And so being able to set that time for yourself. Okay. And then the last thing in define would really just be kind of a gut check. Okay. Or a checkup from the neck up. But what do your instincts tell you? Okay. Help you determine when someone is violating your boundaries or when you need to set one up. Okay. Check in with your body. If you've ever heard some of my other talks before, when I go into emotional intelligence, is that your body usually is more aware of things than even your brain is sometimes. Okay. So check in with your body, check your heart rate, sweating, tightness in your chest. Okay. That'll tell you what you can handle and where the boundaries should be drawn. Okay. Maybe you clench your fist every single time your roommate or sister borrows some clothes from you. And you're like, man, that really gets on my nerves. Like, think of those things. And you're doing all these actions. Your body is actually telling you how you're feeling. Okay. Okay. Maybe you even want to tighten your jaw when your relatives ask you about like your dating life. Like, oh, this is why I always bring it up during holidays. It's like, oh, how's school going? Or are you starting to date anybody now? And you're like, man, why do you like leave me alone? I don't want questions like that. I'm just living my life. Okay. And so starting to realize what your body is trying to tell you. I apologize for so much coughing. Usually it gets irritated when I'm talking more. Okay, but usually it does start to tell you when these things need to be addressed. Okay, number two is to communicate them clearly. And I'm going to let you know, this is definitely the hardest one. Okay, in a professional sense, it'll probably be a lot easier. And it's because, well, we talk to each other differently than we talk to our family. Okay, when you talk to your family, this is going to be the thing that's probably, I don't want to say it will give you trouble, but sometimes the words you use can kind of feel like maybe we're talking down to somebody. Because I know in like books and stuff, they'll tell you, hey, use I feel statements or I statements and things like that of like, oh, well, I feel like this when this happens because blank, and what I need is blank. Okay, but if I said that to my sister years ago, she'd be like, why are you talking like that? Like, why are you trying to like therapize me or anything like that? Okay. And so I'd have to kind of like, I guess, talk in the way that I normally would while still communicating my boundaries and how I want to talk to her. Okay. Now over years, like we've been able to do this. So I could easily say like, hey, you know what? I kind of felt a little, I guess certain way when you said that, or kind of were a little snarky with me this morning, so if you could tone it down a little bit, that'd really help. Okay. And you see, I'm still able to kind of communicate it to her, but I don't have to, I guess, feel like I'm talking down to her. Okay. And that's usually a huge thing, especially as we start to learn more about our boundaries, is not wanting to talk down to like family. In professional sense, like I said, you can use those I statements. Hey, you can use those I statements of like, hey, I felt like this when this happened because blank. What I need is blank. Okay. Usually the reason why I say use I statements though, is just because it allows you to be assertive. If someone sets boundaries with assertiveness, it feels firm, but kind. Okay? And that's what we want to go for, is firm, but kind. I don't want to push anybody away. I don't want anybody to feel like I was aggressive or harsh or punishing them. Okay. But I do want to use that assertive language like, hey, this is my boundary. It's clear set. And I just want to make sure that I'm establishing that for myself. Okay. And I do this even with my staff. Okay. So I statements show confidence and good boundary setting by expressing thoughts, feelings, and opinions without worrying what other people are thinking. Okay. Another thing to do when you're learning to communicate your boundaries is really just learning to say no. This is actually a huge thing. I know Baker and Lindsay were actually doing their November where they were just like, I'm just saying no to things that don't align with my boundaries, don't align with my goals. And remembering that no is a complete sentence. Okay. And sometimes we might feel hesitant to say no without offering more info. But you can stay simple. You don't have to over explain. Okay. It's not necessary most of the time. Sometimes assertiveness isn't needed for boundary setting as much as personal tolerance for being uncomfortable. Okay. You can say no without an explanation and without providing any emotional labor to the person you're saying it to. Okay. Like if I don't want to do something, I'm just like, yeah, no, I don't want to go to that. Okay. And I expect somebody to feel comfortable with me just saying, no, I don't want to go to that. Okay. I don't want to do this. Like I'm a pretty homebody person sometimes. So people ask me like, hey, do you want to go out to, like, since I live in Vegas, like, oh, do you want to go out to the strip? No, I don't want to do that. I was like, but if you want to come to my house, you want to hang out, you can, but I'm good staying here. So like I said, you can absolutely say no to things, and remembering that, because I do think that's pretty important. And then the last thing I would say in communicate, and then even kind of bleeding into staying simple, okay, is developing a system for yourself. Okay, is developing a system for yourself. As a lot of times we'll make like to-do lists of things that I feel like I have to do or things that need to get done, and sort through your to-do list. Okay, address each task, and next to each of them, write down one of four things. Okay. So if I had a list of things of like, oh, I need to, I don't know, go to the grocery store. I need to go fill up our gallons of water. I got to go take my dog to the vet. I got to talk to so-and-so, whatever it is. Okay. I'm going to make that list of things I feel like I need to do. And then next to each one, I'm going to write one of 4 things, addressing each task. Okay. So this would be do it. Okay. So it's like something I have to do. I'm going to write next to it. Yeah, I got to do this. This is something I have to do. Okay. Defer it. Could somebody else do this task? Okay, like, do I have to do this task? Could my wife do it? Could my sister do it? Could I pass this on to a coworker? Okay, so defer it. So do it, defer it. Number 3 is delegate it. Okay. Could somebody else just completely take over this task? Is this something that I even need to do in the first place? Okay. And then the last one is, I think is the most important, is drop it. Okay. It's like, maybe it's on your list, but you look at it and you actually think about it and you're like, does this even need to get done? Like, do I even need to do this? Does anybody even need to do this? Is this important for today? Okay. And so I think drop it is definitely a really important one. Okay. So I'll repeat them. So like I said, make that to-do list, address each task in one of 4 ways. And that's do it. I'm going to do this myself. I'll tackle this. Defer it. Okay. This could be just move to another day, move to someone else. Okay. Delegate it. It's a task I don't even need to do myself. Still needs to get done, but I don't really have to do it myself. And then number 4 is drop it. And it's like, I put this on my list, but now thinking about it, I don't think it actually is all that important. Okay. So allowing yourself to stay simple with those things. Okay. And then another important thing to remember is that it is impossible to set boundaries without setting consequences. Okay. It is impossible to set boundaries without setting consequences. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to like punish everybody that like steps over your line or your bubble, or anything like that. This just means that when setting boundaries, it's important to explicitly state why they are important. Okay. For example, a person maybe in an unhealthy relationship might declare that their partner needs to start respecting their career goals. Okay. And if this partner wants to continue being in a relationship with them, it is also crucial to declare those consequences. Okay. Like, hey, this is important to me. And if you're not able to like go along with those guidelines, and especially when they're like really important boundaries for yourself, okay, establishing like, we may not be able to connect as long as I thought, or we may not be able to continue this relationship. This may not be the right fit. Okay, so only declare consequences that one is willing to follow through on. Okay, or else the boundary is not going to be effective in the first place. Okay. In general, the key to setting boundaries is first figuring out what you want from your various relationships. Setting boundaries is based on those desires, and then being clear with yourself and with other people about your boundaries. Okay. So let's move into boundaries in relationships. I don't have a fancy picture with this one, I'm sorry. But boundaries in relationships. Okay. So as I said, I think boundaries in relationships and all types of relationships are probably the most important. And it's because this allows you guys to actually grow a deeper relationship when you connect with each other. So let me go ahead and stop sharing there. Okay. In other words, healthy boundaries can be the difference between a healthy, happy relationship and a toxic, dysfunctional one. Okay. And a lack of boundaries can lead to an unhealthy relationship because one partner may feel that they have no privacy anymore, or it can feel like in relationships where people also have children, boundaries can be particularly important. Okay. And it's because you want to be able to set those needs as well, especially for like new mothers who can set boundaries with their partners in order to respect their needs. Hey, will likely be better off than one who cannot. Okay. And this will help the relationship too. And then especially in a business setting as well. Okay. In a business setting as well, is being able to communicate those boundaries, to either our people, if we're coaching others, or even above to our managers. Of like, hey, these are the things that are important to me, and this is what I want to go after. And so being able to communicate what I want, what my desires are, and what the line is that I want to make sure that we're not able to cross. Okay. And so that's why I think one of the biggest things that is important when it comes to setting boundaries, the first step is literally just sitting down and figuring out what your values are. Okay. What's important to me in each relationship, because they are going to be different. Okay. Obviously, like my relationship with my wife and the boundaries I have there are going to be completely different than my boundaries with Evan or with Leo, my assistant manager. Okay. And so when I talk, I'm trying to give different examples, and it's because it isn't an exact science. There's so many different relationships that we have. And so trying to figure out those things of like, what do I value? What do I want to get from this relationship as well? Okay. And what are the things that I don't want to be crossed? Okay. And then if necessary, remembering like, hey, what are the consequences and what's important if this boundary is crossed? Okay. And the hardest step is then communicating it, okay? Especially when boundaries are crossed. That is probably the hardest step, is communicating like, hey, you stepped over this letter. This made me feel this type of way, and being vulnerable in that sense. But I think that's also why boundaries are important, because it allows us to get vulnerable, okay? And it allows us to tell other people like, hey, this is how it made me feel. And I really value this relationship and I want it to continue. And this is why I'm telling you how that made me feel. Okay. Because when we don't communicate these things, when we don't tell people when our boundaries have been crossed, or we don't even know our boundaries have been crossed, as I said, that's when the anger, resentment, and burnout starts to come. Okay. So if you have been feeling those things, kind of take a step back and think of like, okay, cool. Well, why did I feel those feelings? And possibly what was the boundary that was crossed that I don't even know exists? Okay. Because once again, our bodies are going to tell us how we feel. Cool. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to recognize and honor other people's boundaries, since obviously I want us to be a little bit selfish. And I know sometimes that feels like a negative word, but I do think it's important to be a little bit selfish, be able to say no, be able to like, hey, I need to take time for me. Okay. But I also think it's important to recognize what other people's boundaries are. Okay. And how to respect other people's boundaries as well. Okay. So I would say there would be 3 rules for this. Okay. 3 rules for this. So number 1 would just be watching for cues. Okay, watching for cues. Noting social cues is a great way to determine another person's boundaries. When you're talking with someone, and maybe especially now when somebody like takes a step back, I don't know if you've ever been at the grocery store, like I totally still follow like the 6 feet line where I'm like, okay, I want space. Okay. And when you'll take that step forward because somebody's too close to you behind, and they like take another step forward, and you're like, stop, like I'm trying to create actual physical boundaries between us. Like, please get out of my bubble. Okay. But maybe even when you're talking to other people, you take that step forward, and they're trying to take step backs. Okay, you're being given information about their comfort level with closeness. Okay. And so you're starting to like clue into those even physical boundaries. Okay. Possible hints that someone may want like more space could be avoiding eye contact, turning away or sideways, backing up. Maybe there's limited conversation response. If they do the excessive nodding or huh-ing, when you do that, when you like want the conversation to end, you're like, okay, like you want the conversation to end. And so being aware of that in other people as well. Okay, maybe your voice suddenly becomes higher pitched, nervous gestures like laughing or talking too fast. Now I know for me, I am definitely like a nervous smiler and a nervous laugher. So when people make me uncomfortable, I'm like, okay, yeah. Yeah, and people usually don't notice it, but I am actually very nervous. I'm like, man, I don't want to be here anymore. Folding arms or stiffening posture, flinching or wincing. So just starting to be aware and watching for little cues. Okay. So those little things can also definitely help. But also remember that every single person is going to be different. Okay. And cues aren't going to be the same for everybody. Okay. This is why I say it is sometimes a hard practice to, practice, but it is just being aware, and it's just learning more into it and diving into it. Okay. Certain people may keep in mind that some people may use certain gestures all the time, and that may not provide any cues. Like I know it lists like talking with hands, but I just naturally talk with my hands all the time. So this would not mean that I'm like nervous. This is how I talk. You guys can't see it because I do it below the screen, but that's pretty much how I talk all the time. Okay, so just being aware of that, like social cues may be different. And so, excuse me. Okay, so just trying to think more. And as you start to get to know people, you'll start to notice their like normal things as well. Like if somebody is like an or when they keep talking, or if they start to limit their conversation and they're not doing as much. And this is important from a manager standpoint, is to treat each person as an individual. And it's because, well, they are. Okay, each person is going to have that different personality of how they respond and react to things. And then the easiest way to figure out people's boundaries is just ask. Right? Just ask. Never underestimate the power of asking. Okay. You can ask if a hug is okay, or if you can ask a personal question. This is something I do with my staff all the time, where they'll tell me something, but it was kind of like I guess the front of it, not the full question. And so I'll want to dig in, but I'm like, hey, is it okay? Do you want to tell me a little bit more about that? Okay. Hey, do you want to dive into that a little bit more? Okay. And just asking, hey, is it okay if we talk about this? And just asking their boundaries on that. And it's okay for them to say no. If they're like, no, I don't feel okay, cool. We'll move on to the next thing. And so being able to respect that in people. So those are pretty much all the tips I have there. I know I typically go fast whenever I go through a lot of my talks. But I will pretty much just wrap up with a little closeout there. Is just really setting healthy boundaries is a crucial part of life and an important aspect of any self-care practice. Someone who's not used to setting boundaries might even feel guilty or selfish when you first start out. And that's okay. But setting boundaries is necessary for mental health and well-being. Okay. And appropriate boundaries can look very different depending on the setting. And it's important to set them in all aspects of one's life. Okay. And finally, while setting boundaries is crucial, it is even more crucial to respect the boundaries that others have set for themselves. This goes for any aspect of our relationships that we have, whether we're parents, even us as children, to our parents, romantic partners, bosses, coworkers, and anyone who interacts with us or has power over anyone else. Okay, because respect is a two-way street, and appreciating the boundaries others have set for themselves is as important as setting boundaries for oneself. Okay. So starting to think and even challenge yourself maybe this weekend before going into the holidays, especially as Christmas gets closer, or any other holidays that you celebrate, okay, is how easy is it for you to set healthy boundaries, okay? How easy is it for you to set healthy boundaries? And are there possibly boundaries that you need to move, realign, or even just possibly set for yourself, okay? So that's pretty much everything that I have for you guys. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, snide remarks, emotional outbursts? I'm opening the doors for emotional outbursts.
Hey, Christine, I love the talk. I think it was such a great time to have a talk like that, for sure. As I think of boundaries, I think of disciplines, like disciplines we can put in place that benefit us and also benefit other people too, right? And so that was such a good talk. And I know you almost killed yourself for it.
I did. I promise it was much worse before, so it has gotten a lot better.
Definitely a lot of gold today for sure, though. It was things that, some things like we're aware of, but we don't really know how aware of it we really are, or you know what I mean? Like it's really nice to have these reminders and just be like, hey, it's okay to be human. Like, let's make sure we're practicing being human. It's like, oh my gosh, I forgot.
Yeah.
As silly as that sounds, like it's so easy to get caught up in our day-to-days and saying yes to all these things, and because we want to stay on the more positive side of the spectrum, but then realizing how much positive really is in the word no.
Yeah.
for certain situations, you know, and just being able to accept that on a personal level is just so powerful. So I loved your talk today. Sorry I was so distracted. I'm getting ready for my daughter's first birthday today, so I was like,
Ooh.
hey, wait, but I don't want to miss anything.
No worries. It was recorded, so you can definitely rewatch it if you would like to.
Perfect. But thank you very much for this talk today. I really needed it. It was perfect timing.
Yeah, no worries. Like I said, I told Baker I think it was a good time getting into the holidays. This is especially when we could just be like, yeah, sure, whatever. We can do all the things, and we tend to let our boundaries kind of get trampled over.
Exactly.
So.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Any other takeaways, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I liked the talk today. I mean, it was just awesome to hear everything. And you usually don't hear it in like a work setting, or you hear it like, you know, from your family at all. Like setting boundaries isn't something you hear from your family. You know, it's like you set a boundary with your mom or your dad. It's like,
Yeah.
But really what I liked is that you said that really like boundaries are meant to protect those relationships. You know what I mean? Because it's not blocking you off from that person, it's blocking them off from damaging you.
Mhm.
Or you allowing whatever they say to damage you. So I like that a lot. And then also just the way to set the boundary starts from the intention and whatever you desire for that relationship. So really what I learned today was boundaries bring progress to relationships, if anything. So that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course, no worries. So I'm glad you guys got some good takeaways from it. Excited to see you guys be able to set your own boundaries and be able to even like share with other people. Because I think as we start to practice it more ourselves, other people start to even take examples of that. Like, wow, I can set boundaries with other people too. Like, it's not just you. Like, I can actually be able to have those connections. And I think that's when relationships really start to thrive. I would say even with my parents and my wife, those are really starting to grow a lot more as I've told them like, okay, hey, well, this is what I would like. This is what I don't like, and if we could respect those, I think it helps a lot more. So, well, it was awesome to see you guys today. I'm glad you guys got to learn a whole bunch. I'm going to stop the recording.